Tartaria, the guardians who were erased. Part 1. Giants in everyday life. I started noticing them not in history books, not in academic journals, but on the margins of old photographs. That particular sepia grain that makes everything feel both more real and less certain. Photographs of people, extraordinarily tall people. People who, according to the comfortable narrative we've inherited about human physical limits, simply shouldn't exist. And then they vanished. Not gradually, not through some documented decline we could trace through medical records. They simply stopped appearing. Somewhere around 1800, maybe 1850 at the latest, the photographic record shifts. The giants disappear. And the deeper I looked into that absence, the more it seemed to line up with something else we've already explored in this series. The sudden disappearance of Tartaria itself. The timing feels too precise to be coincidence. Let me be clear about what I mean here. These aren't circus performers. These aren't the rare genetic outliers we still see today. Documented medically understood cases of gigantism or acromegaly, and they're photographed not as curiosities but as ordinary members of society. Standing with families, working construction sites, wearing the clothing of soldiers, farmers, laborers, they look fully integrated into the daily life of their era. The pattern repeats with unsettling consistency. One photograph, reportedly from Siberia around 1870, 3 men standing beside an ordinary doorframe. That doorframe measures roughly 12 feet high. One of the men has to duck slightly to fit beneath it. He's wearing work clothes. He looks bored. Not posed, not performing. Just a work crew going about its day. Another image from the American frontier dated 1883. A group of railroad workers, several men, 3 of them towering visibly over the rest. Work clothes again, tired faces, the casual posture of people simply doing their jobs. It's exactly that ordinariness that makes the content so unsettling to sit with. And here's the strangest part. These kinds of photographs exist in relative abundance up to a certain point, and then they stop. Not gradually, not with declining frequency. They stop almost as if a switch had been flipped, as if the subjects themselves were simply no longer there to photograph. Part 2. Architecture built for a different scale, which raises a simple but critical question. Where did they go? And that's where the great mud flood theory becomes hard to set aside. We've walked through the evidence in previous episodes. Cities buried under meters of sediment, first floors converted into basements, streets raised, entire ground-level architecture swallowed and forgotten. A pattern visible across continents that looks like a catastrophic burial event sometime in the mid to late 1800s. And the timing lines up almost exactly with the disappearance of the giants from the photographic record. Not roughly, almost exactly, which leads to an uncomfortable question. What if the mud flood wasn't purely a geological event? What if it functioned as a reset? A deliberate erasure not just of buildings and infrastructure, but of the people who understood how to operate them. What if the burial of the old physical world coincided with the removal of its caretakers? Look at what's left behind. We have the shells of Tartarian buildings, repurposed, renamed, their original function obscured. We have basement windows and buried ground floors. We have oversized doorways that now technically accommodate ordinary-sized people but still look perpetually excessive for that purpose. What we don't have are the operators, the maintainers, the people whose scale the architecture was actually built for. Consider that architecture again, not just its size but its apparent sophistication. Systems that some researchers connect to atmospheric electricity, resonance chambers built into cathedral ceilings, elaborate water and air circulation woven directly into massive stone structures, precision that modern engineers still find difficult to fully explain, let alone replicate with the tools officially available in the 1800s. It's architecture that looks, in places, engineered for operators working at an entirely different physical scale. What if these individuals weren't simply large? What if they were guardians of a kind of knowledge that resists being written down? The kind that requires physical presence, demonstration, embodied expertise passed hand to hand rather than page to page. Part 3. The gaps in the record. If beings like this existed, and the photographic evidence at least raises the question, then their sudden total disappearance is a real problem for the conventional historical narrative. You don't simply lose an entire category of people without explanation, without documented disease, conflict, or any of the usual mechanisms of population decline. Unless, of course, that disappearance was engineered. The deeper I dug into the historical record, what little of it survives, the more I noticed a pattern of disruption clustering around this same period. The mid to late 1800s weren't just a time of industrial revolution and political upheaval. They were also a time of strange silences in the archive. Hospital records that abruptly stop, census data that becomes inconsistent or vanishes outright. Entire years where a certain category of documentation simply doesn't exist, not destroyed by fire or war, just absent, as though it was never created in the first place. And what documentation does survive often contradicts itself. Military records listing heights that seem implausibly tall. A medical anomaly noted once and never mentioned again. A reference to an unusually large individual that appears in one account of an event and is completely missing from another account of the very same event. Then there are the photographs that did survive. And here it gets genuinely uncomfortable. Many of them in later reprintings appear to have been quietly corrected. Scale normalized, tall figures reduced through careful cropping, and in more recent decades through digital retouching. Comparing original glass plates to their later published versions, the differences are hard to explain away. Someone at some point put real effort into making these images look less extraordinary, or making them disappear altogether. Part 4. A global pattern of silence. Because if the mud flood really was a global event, and the pattern genuinely does span continents, its coordination implies something extraordinary. You don't bury multiple continents under meters of sediment through unrelated random geological processes, at least not with the kind of consistency we see reflected in the architectural record. And if the disappearance of the giants is connected to that same event, we're looking at coordinated erasure on a scale that's hard to fully comprehend. An effort not just to remove people, but to remove the memory of them. From photographs, from records, from collective consciousness. The pattern repeats across North America, Europe, Asia, Australia. Wherever we find Tartarian-style architecture, we also find this same gap in the human record. The same window in which unusually tall individuals simply vanish from documentation. Not through war, not through plague. None of the usual mechanisms, they're just gone. And the societies left behind seem to have collectively, quietly agreed to act as though they'd never been there. Come back to what we've already established about Tartarian technology. Atmospheric electricity systems, resonance-based architecture, water and air purification built directly into massive structures. Systems that sophisticated don't get built and then simply abandoned without operational manuals, training, succession planning. Unless that knowledge was never meant to be written down in the first place, unless it lived in specific individuals, physically capable of interacting with systems built for their own scale. Picture it. Someone 8, 9, 10 feet tall reaching components housed in ceilings that today look purely decorative. Operating mechanisms built into architectural features we've since reclassified as ornamental. Once you consider that possibility, the excessive, wasteful proportions of these buildings stop looking accidental. They start looking like they were sized correctly for someone else. Part 5. What we're left with. What stays with me isn't the presence of giants in old photographs. It's their complete absence from the conversation today. The near-total silence around what should be one of the more significant open questions in our understanding of the recent past. Where did they go? Why? Who decided their existence needed to be scrubbed from the official record, not just why or when, but how? How do you coordinate an erasure at that scale? How do you get entire societies across generations and continents to maintain the same silence? The mud flood may offer part of the answer. A catastrophic event, natural or otherwise, that literally buried the old world and forced survivors to dig out, rebuild, and start writing a new version of events. In that kind of chaos, memory becomes malleable, and the official story gets written by whoever ends up holding the resources when the dust settles. If the giants were deliberately removed, physically, or relocated somewhere beyond ordinary reach, the mud flood would have made for near-perfect cover. Fold their disappearance into the general trauma of the disaster. Wait a generation or two for living memory to fade, then simply deny they were ever there. Which brings me back to a single nagging question. What knowledge died with them? We're taught that progress is linear, that every generation builds on the last. But what if some of what we've lost, the resonance architecture, the possible free energy systems, the deep understanding of atmospheric electricity, was actually more advanced than what we have now? What if what we call progress is really just slow recovery from a catastrophic loss we've forgotten we suffered? I don't have answers. I'm not sure anyone does. But the questions are worth sitting with, uncomfortable as they are. Why do the photographs stop? Why does documentation of unusually tall individuals vanish from the record after a specific point? Why does that timing align so closely with the mud flood events we've already documented? And if a coordinated erasure on this scale was possible once, what's stopping it from happening again quietly right now? The giants are gone. The buildings remain, hollow, repurposed, their original function long forgotten. What's left are fragments, photographs that seem impossible, doorways built for bodies that officially never existed. Once you notice it, it's difficult to unsee. And maybe that absence, the vast echoing space where the evidence should be, is itself a kind of evidence. A negative shape in the historical record cut precisely to the outline of what we've been taught not to remember. What do you think? Have you noticed anything like this yourself? Let us know in the comments. And if this got you thinking, stay curious, because the questions worth asking are usually the ones that make us a little uncomfortable.